Hi, guys. We're going to get started. Here we are. Even though it feels like it's April out, it's only February. And we have a lot to do tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and just turn it right over to Hillary to introduce our program.
Hi, everyone. Yes, tonight's guest, I'm really excited to introduce Mae Crauder-Davis. And she is a mixed media artist, and I met her at Jefferson Point when we had our first gallery over there. And I loved some of the things that she did. It was really neat. A lot of things that had resin and found objects. And then I found out that she actually made a lot of the pieces that she uses on her. So they're not necessarily found objects, but pieces that she makes. And she's been doing art since 1988. She is a Hoosier originally and moved to California and then moved back here. But she has a gallery representation in Alaska. And then, of course, she shows in our Guild Gallery here. And, well, I could say a lot more about Mae, but I'm going to let her take over, and she's going to explain her processes tonight and show us some of her lovely work. So, Mae, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I've got one. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, hi. My first lecture demonstration was on art material safety. So I am going to basically speak brilliantly on art material safety briefly. Have any of you seen a safety data sheet? Okay, some of you have. This is basically OSHA is the governmental agency that makes sure we're safe in the workplace. Obviously, when we're in our studio, we're the boss. I'm the best boss I've ever had, and I bet a lot of you are too. Well, it does behoove us, particularly when we're working with a lot of the petroleum-based mediums and materials, to know how to do it safely. So I leave it to you, so I don't eat up a lot of our time. I leave it to you to know how to ventilate and cross-ventilate your studios. Just in case you haven't seen one, these are kind of fun, so I'm going to hand these around. This is the safety data sheet for liquid soluvar gloss varnish. And this is the safety data sheet for PBO, which I will be introducing you to when I talk about my materials. And they do discuss things like flammability, because we don't really need our lovely art to go up in flames at any point in time, and health, and even the most safe or least toxic thing. This is my primary art material. It is a gloss medium. Once upon a time, Golden used to put the word polymer there, but I guess we were confusing people, so they just call it gloss medium now. This is listed as non-toxic, but it has detergent in as a surfactant. It helps the molecules slippy slide against each other and increases or decreases the viscosity of what they've made. Please stop me if I'm throwing big words at you, because this is how I learned this stuff. It also has ammonia in it, which is an antibacterial agent, so you don't have mold floating on the top of your medium, which would be a definite yuck. I have gotten chemically triggered headaches off of this if I don't ventilate and cross-ventilate my studio. So it can give you a migraine. Yes, you're probably not going to die from a migraine, but you're not going to be real artistic either. So just to make yourself aware, every website, Dick Blick particularly, will give you the safety data sheets. You don't have to print them out. One of those is 11 pages, one of those is 12 pages, and my eyes cross on about page 3. So you can become aware of what you're doing, and you can stay safe as an artist, because we'd like to be doing this for a while. I can't even see where I'm at. You'll have to yell at me if I'm way off there. So basically the materials that I use, this is my primary. I buy it by the gallon, usually 3 or 4 at a time. I'm building layers to create materials. Why would I want to create my own materials? I used to be an oil painter. In an oil painting class, we were asked to use acrylics because someone had signed up for an oil painting class not realizing they were allergic to turpentine. So we all went to acrylics. I cannot paint with acrylics the way I painted with oils. There is no transparency, there is no translucency. The light does not move through the layers, and I tend to work in layers. Even as an oil painter, I let my colors blend by glazing and forming layers. So acrylics were a real bummer for me. It was a while ago, so yes, it was a bummer at that point in time. And I started playing with the acrylics. So everything I'm doing now resulted from that play, particularly how to colorize. So I'm making sheets of material. I noticed when I was trying to work as collage artist, I knew looking at a collage where they got the materials. If it was Japanese paper, if it was printed paper out of England, I could recognize the materials, and I did not like that. So I started making my own materials. Sheets, based on this, they feel like plastic that I can cut with scissors. So I'm using 3 different ways of coloring the sheets that I'm creating. This is a solvent-based paint. This is cross-ventilate your studio stuff because it is a petroleum distillate, and you can get all kinds of, if you breathe it long enough, you can do damage to stuff you may want to use later in life. Then we get into the acrylics, which you have paint, you have inks, you have liquid acrylics, you have heavy body, you have light body. They're talking about the thickness or thinness of the paint, the pigment loads, and what the fillers and stuff are in it. I strongly urge you to get the best possible quality of art materials you can afford. I have gone for an occasional sale, and it's very frustrating because it doesn't have the pigment load. There's not enough color in the paint to do what I need to do with it. So something like this, I'm going to be handing around a lot of stuff. This is basically to give you that experience of something you've probably never handled. I once took my art into a gallery, and the woman said, my daughter owns the gallery. She's not here, but you know, I'll look at your art if you'd like and hold it for her. And I says, well, it's something you've never seen before. And she says, I'm 96, I've seen everything. So I brought in a work of my art, and I handed it to her, and she looked at it and went, I've never seen this before, which was a real lovely ego thing for me. But what I'm doing is so unusual. It's, and you can see the 4 over there, and I'll explain a lot more about those later, that there's no one I can talk to about it, which is kind of frustrating. I actually had a conversation on Messenger in Facebook today with a man in LA who did similar stuff but totally different, and he let me pick his brain for almost half an hour on the computer, and he gave me some great ideas for an issue I was having. So it's kind of like nobody tells me I'm wrong, but sometimes I really am. So basically, the material that I'm handing around is this stuff. I'm not doing an actual demonstration because this will trigger a migraine in a lot of people, and you can get a chemical triggered headache off of this. So nothing will be open today. So the solvent-based paint is by a company called PBO. PBO stands for lead oxide. It's what the company started with. A lot of companies doing acrylics and the solvent-based are making industrial paint to cover machinery. And they have colors, but it's more for safety factors within an industry. And then artists went, we want to play with it too. And they responded very well to that. So a lot of things that artists use came from industry, which is very cool. Now, that piece, if you look at the front and back of the piece going around, there is a front and back. This is a metal leaf, which is coming in a store in little packages of 20 or 25 sheets. It is thinner than tissue paper, but it's a bear to handle. But what it does, this stuff has a pH of 8.5. It is alkaline and it is caustic and it creates copric oxides in the metal alloys. At my height of this, I had 20 different metal alloys. They come out of Germany, Italy, Japan, and China, and they have different thicknesses. The Chinese metal leaf is the thinnest, and the Italian and German tend to be thicker and stronger. And again, buying the quality. But if you look at that, knowing that that metal was thinner than tissue paper, it oxidizes with a front and a back and two different colors. So every time I make a sheet, I get two options to use it in my materials. You can also go with, I have a lot of toys. This is, if you look at the water lily, I did that. I'm working on glass, window glass, glass that I get when people give me their old frames and glass. And I can work on as large of a piece of glass as I can safely put on a table. When I actually, and I'll show you later, when I actually pull the material off the glass, it has to be completely flat surface, because if I tried to hold it up and pull it, I could break the glass. And I don't like that. But this piece came off of the same piece that the water lily background did. This is acrylic, and acrylic paint is amazing. When you buy metallic acrylic paint, it's ground mica, rolled in pigment. They have machines that do that. And the pigments rise and fall in the layer of wet paint, which is so cool. So this is part of that, and this is the back of it, where pigment fell. So I've got metal, I've got solvent-based, and I've got all kinds of acrylic stuff to play with as far as making material. I've just increased my options infinitely, instead of going into the store and buying what I saw in somebody else's collage. So everything becomes a toy, which is great. Then I bought a kiln, and that gives me fused glass, which is a whole nother way to play. And the fused glass comes in sheets. So this is a sheet of fused glass. It is kind of a pink and white. And then over it, I put a sheet of clear glass with iridescence on the glass. The moon is sterling silver foil from Japan, and it is thicker than the metal leaf, but when the glass heats, it moves and contracts, and the sterling silver foil holds that shape. Then the decal is after that process. So a lot of the glass is in and out of the kiln 5 or 6 times, but you're welcome to play with the glass. It should be okay to drop on a carpet, but let's try not to. Everything is a toy. We're back on everything is a toy. This has no glass on it. What is on the surface, these little beads are micro beads. They're glass rolled in pigment. These are about 1/2 millimeter. They come in various sizes. These were very popular in the 90s. Joann's sold them, fabric stores sold them. I bought as many as I could. Right now I still have a shoebox full of different colors of micro beads. Right now they're using them more in acrylic nails, but they're still out there. The larger pieces on this are casting grain. They take melted metal, drop it into water so that it makes smaller bits, so when artists who work with bronze and brass and pour into molds, lost wax casting, use these, they're already small enough to melt evenly, so when they pour into the mold, they don't have chunks of metal. And they're valid as a toy, because everything is a toy. And they actually, because particularly if there's copper in it, the reason this changes, the metal leaf changes, is because there's copper in my alloys. The sterling silver will not change because there is no copper or not enough copper in the sterling silver. So you kind of become a scientist if you're going to do mixed media. Mixed media can be anything. It can be pen and ink. It can be watercolor and colored pencil. I'm just going to go for a little higher level and doing the kiln, bought that, did that. So I took some classes in how to cut glass, but mostly it's just experimentation and playing with the temperature. The kiln goes up to 1,600 degrees. I don't take it that high. The element will eventually wear out. So I've got all the toys and lots of play, and we can start handing other things around so you have time to look. I invite you to touch. People walk into my tent at art shows and I'm like, you're welcome to touch the art. And some of them are like this. They wouldn't touch that art to save themselves. But it's not something most artists will ask. But the textures, the microbeads, the way the surfaces are different. This is acrylic pour. This is the solvent-based paint, and this is the metal leaf. So my backgrounds are kind of, I can't control what's happening once I start pouring something. The piece that goes with the water lily, because I experiment, I tend to use things in ways they were never intended to be used. That is acrylic paint, and I thinned it with isopropyl alcohol, 91%, as pure as I could find in a store, isopropyl alcohol, which left a different surface. Normally when you do an acrylic pour, it's smooth. You put in Floetrol or something to make it smooth. That has a texture to it. And I invite you to go and touch those at any point you want to. But that acrylic has a texture to it because the isopropyl alcohol acted differently with the pigment and the emulsion. This is an emulsion. So I've got the toys. And I love art stores. Right now I haven't been able to walk into an art store. I lived in San Diego for 35 years. You're going to hear me say, but in San Diego we had a Dick Blick. We had an artist and craftsman. We had the art stores that you could walk in and go, I'll have one of these and two of those, and you know. When I shop Dick Blick online, I actually have to think about what I'm buying, and they tell me the numbers and kind of hold back a little bit, maybe, not much. So I want to create something, and I'm creating the material. The solvent-based was designed by PBO to be poured. They make a tray. It's basically a canvas with little, not a canvas, a wood panel, sorry, with a lip on it. So you can pour, and then it does stuff. And then you have basically whatever, 12 by 12 or whatever, of the colors that poured. My problem with that is I can't window out what I want. The piece that the watercolor is on, or the water lily is on, was a 2 foot by 2 foot sheet of glass. I built the lip that holds the paint by cutting layers of, this is an old piece that I didn't like anymore, or I didn't have enough to play with, and stacking it on the edge using acrylic polymer medium to seal it so I have a tray. The first 4 layers of anything I do are this, with a 4-inch brush. These brushes, to get 4 inches of a bristle brush, would cost this arm and that leg, and this is under $1. And I can use it maybe 10 or 12 times before you can see it starting to goo up a little bit, before I have to throw it away. So this is a bargain, the foam brushes, and they come in a few different sizes, or you can cut them to shape, which is also very cool. But once I have this, then I can make my sheet of material, and that looks like this. So this is the solvent-based paint poured into my little tray. It has to sit, dry, and cure. And the cure of this takes about 2 weeks. If I try to take it off too soon, it wrinkles because it's still wet underneath somewhere. But now we do the magic. And we have a sheet of material. And to work with this, and look at the back. It's different, and yet you can see where the colors come from. To work with this, momentito, I have to cut off those edges. And I lose at least a ½ an inch all the way around. I can't, this is a 16 by 20 inch sheet of glass. I cannot make a 16 by 20 inch sheet of material on this glass because I lose at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches of it. But with this, I can window out an 11 by 14 in any pattern I want, or even a 12 by 16 if I work really, really, really well. But, and you also see, these were older paints, and you're going to see a few little lumpy bumpies in there because they didn't stir up. I attended a lecture about the solvent-based paints a week after my retirement in 2014, and I bought stuff because at the time I could. Now I'm a little more circumspect about what I order, and I think more in terms of project. But it did not all stir up, so I have some texture in here, and yet it will work within my art. So this can hand around. Thank you so much, Hillary. You're very patient. So when I'm doing designs, now once you have the material, anything goes. I don't have one of those here yet, but that material, it's 10 layers if I'm using the metal. That is the 4 layers plus the pour. So you're getting up into the 4 millimeter thickness. I can still cut it with scissors. I have arthritis, but I can still cut it. Speaking of scissors, you gotta have a lot of scissors. These are fabric shears. This gives me the longest and straightest cut of material that I can get. And I love those. These are more like utilitarian scissors, like the Fiskars. And then we have a little pair of Joyce Chen scissors you were supposed to use in the kitchen. This has never seen a kitchen. But they're very good for the detail work of the trimming. So like the little water lily petals and stuff, I can do those. Also, I get my tools everywhere. Art stores, of course, but also hardware stores and dollar stores. And if you need stirrers, because I use a lot of stirrers, you can get a whole bag of these plastic knives at the dollar store for $1. It's so cool. This is the stick from Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars. I cannot tell you what I have sacrificed to eat Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars to get these sticks, because they're brilliant for stirring anything in a small jar, which is so cool. Coffee stirrers, again, just get into a little jar and stir them up. As far as brushes, I don't worry a lot about synthetic bristles, real bristles. No, I want cheap stuff. And I can usually find cheap stuff. People who know me give me cheap stuff. Bless their little hearts. So once I've got all this stuff, I go into my living room and I start throwing things on the floor. These sheets of material end up in piles on the floor because they're all different. So I'm using all these different things, putting them on the floor, and finding my palette for the work I want to do. So this is my latest one. And this is, I believe it's in Eland. Okay, 35 years in San Diego. They have this little zoo that is one of the most beautiful and big in the world, and they have a wild animal park, now they call it the Safari Park, that I took literally thousands of photographs in 35 years. When you're turning your photographs into art, you have to be very aware of where you took the photograph and what the copyright laws are. San Diego Zoological Society on their website will tell you exactly what you can do with a photograph that you took at the zoo or wild animal park. And it's limited. You cannot print a 2,000 run of posters of any of their animals and sell them for a profit. But you can enter contests. And in this case, in art, I make sure that I'm changing the animal enough that a keeper at the zoo would not recognize the specific animal, no matter what I'm using. Tiger, elephants, zebras. So I start with my photograph. This is the photograph I started with. I actually used 3 or 4 reference photographs. So this is my main photograph of the deer. I can hand this around if you like. It's just basically, take 2,000 of anything and pick out 5 or 6 good ones. So I have this. I have on my computer Photoshop elements. You don't even need the latest Photoshop elements. It's easier to use than Photoshop, and you can turn a photograph into a more simplified version of the image. So the zebra photograph he's got wires in front of him, etc., etc. I did take out some of the wires, but I just want to break that down to the very simplest elements. You can play in any way you want to. This is just how I play. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. So my lovely little deer, will you sit up there for me? Yes, you will. Good for you. Ended up as this sketch. And I tried to break it down to shapes. So you see the horns, you see the ears and that forehead, and you see those eyes. And most of this is cut from the solvent-based paint pours. The background is solvent-based paint pour. In this case, it's an 11 by 14. The background is 11 by 14. I cut out my pieces. Once I have this, the problem is how to transfer it to the surface of the stuff. The stuff does not like pens, etc. And throughout since 2014 that I've been doing this, I find that the best way to handle this is to use white contact paper like you put on your shelves. It will adhere to the surface of this, And then you can cut with one of these around it, so you have your puzzle piece of your finished work. So the best way to do this is to use transfer paper to put it onto the contact paper, put the contact paper using that adhesive onto the material, and then cut it out with scissors. That took me a while to get there, and I've done many different ways to do that. You can also draw on this with a Staedtler Permanent Lumacolor. Not just a Staedtler Permanent, but the Staedtler Permanent Lumacolor pen. You can remove it with alcohol, but it will hold for as long as it takes your sweaty little hands to cut something out. So that gives you another option. I want the eyes to be the focus. You see the horns, you see the ears and stuff, but those eyes are looking at you. So those eyes are actually painted with another PBO product that they paint onto glass with. And it is called vitriol. And it is glossy and gorgeous and deep, deep, deep colors. And then I glazed and glazed and glazed around the rest of the eye to kind of make them move a little bit. But this is just how I play with it. So you can do anything with anything in any way you want to. You are your own boss. Coming up, this is one of the abstract designs. I took a stained glass class when I was learning to fuse glass to learn how to cut glass. So this is now the stained glass that I actually made with this is in my bedroom. So I get to look at it it's an east-facing window, and I get to look at it every morning with the light coming through. But this just gives you a small idea of what mixed media can be. You can take it anywhere you want to, and you can play with it any way you like. Questions? Yes. He has asked what happens if I use less than 4 layers for my base layers. The problem with going too thin with this material, something about the acrylic polymers and even the solvent-based, once I get that sheet of material, it reacts to humidity and temperature, and it shrinks and contracts. I was making a commission piece, 40 inches by 40 inches, and they were rushing me. This was in 2020, or very early 2020. And I made a 40-inch line of color that went all the way across, turned my back on it to get some other stuff done. And when I turned around, it had shrunk an inch, a 40-inch piece, and I had to start over. This is what makes me scream occasionally. So the 4 layers stabilizes what I'm working. I have made pieces where I fold the material, and I want that channel where the material is folded. I have rolled that material. I had a couple of pieces in the gallery where I had a moon on an edge and rolled the edge of the moon in, and it has literally a roll. I want it to be strong enough to do anything I want it to do. So the first 4 layers guarantees that. When I'm working with the metal, it's 4 layers. The 5th layer of medium holds the texture. I can put leaves under the metal, and the leaves, which are floating around somewhere, are very viable. This is what I call a fingertip texture. So I put the leaves in the 5th layer. I put the metal into the 6th layer. I put a layer over the metal that activates the oxidation process on the copper in the alloy to create the copper oxide that make the color. The 2nd layer deepens that. The 3rd and 4th layers seal it so it never changes again. That's a 10-layer process. And almost everything else I do, I bring up to that thickness because it's stable enough to work with architecture.
Follow-up question.
Yes.
Okay, so you are putting the 4 layers down. Are you, to prevent that shrinkage you talked about, are you letting those 4 layers clear, dry for those 2 weeks before you start adding the mixing and the flowing layers?
No, I'm not that patient. But once I complete the entire piece, it has to dry or cure on the glass for at least 2 weeks. It takes a month. I say it's 10 layers and takes a month to make the material. If someone says, gee, that's expensive, I say, really? It's 10 layers and takes a month to create it, and they shut up. I love talking to people about art. When I go to these shows, the Winona Lake show that I did last year, I'm using a wire that a friend gave me after her husband died. It's copper magnet wire, 36 gauge. It's a coated copper wire used in electronics. They coat it so it will not shock across. It used to be used to make radio tuners, et cetera, magnets and stuff. I actually had a man walk in my booth who worked in the factory. And I learned so much in the 20 minutes that, I was going, and I love that because the technology I'm working with, I can't hold it all in my brain, but to talk to someone, I remember it and the processes. People who are trying to sell you art materials will educate you on what they are trying to sell. The safety data sheets, Dick Blick provides them for everything that the manufacturer has given a safety data sheet for. The way things are made. I went to, when I was starting to work with glass, I went to the Bullseye Glass Factory in Portland. They have tours. And I dragged along friends who were going, we gotta go to a stupid factory. And I tell you, by the time we were done with that, you've got people running around with the kilns they use are gas. They heat the glass to over 2,000 degrees. They take a ladle of glass, run across the factory floor, and pour it onto this big table. And they mix the colors. And they put a big roller that goes over it to flatten it down to 3 millimeters. And then they run it through this huge pizza oven to anneal and cool. And just watching that process gave me so much respect for the little piece of glass in my hand when I'm done with it. So yeah, get out there and educate yourself. It's absolutely amazing what is out there and how it's made. Yes.
So when you have that sheet and you want to do it as a background, are you using the contact paper to actually adhere your sheet to another substrate?
No, I'm actually using, I stick to golden because I trust golden. It's the most flexible, it's the clearest, and it's the strongest. That being said, I use their clear tar gel, their self-leveling, the thicker gels to put the glass onto stuff. I try to go through that process. The contact paper is simply a way of transferring this to the materials so I can do that. Yeah, it's just, yes. And I'm still, because of the way I'm experimenting, and I can't really pick a lot of brains about it, everything I do is an experiment in one way or another. I love it, but if I have to get rid of something, that's why they make those black garbage bags.
So you're using like a modeling paste to adhere it to like that board that it's on?
It's a gel. It's a heavy gel. It's a thick gel.
Okay.
They have it in a softer version and then a harder version, and then they put things into it, at least Golden does. Golden or Liquitex are compatible. You get into some of the acrylic products that are made in other countries. Sargent's is made in India, and they will flake off. They will delaminate. When I make something that's 10 layers, I want it like this and I want to stay it like this. If it delaminates in any way, the only place I have a problem is if I have leaves, the leaf itself goes to dust. It's in there and the shape is there and the metal is there, so you can't tell it's gone to dust. If I cut across it to make something else out of a sheet with leaves in it, it will delaminate. It will separate where the dust is. So I have to teach myself to seal my edges. Something like the stripe. I've got my microphone. I'm going over here. Bye. This one is all metal. Again, the metal has a front and back. So I've got the back of some of the front, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you look closely at this, and I invite you to come over and make friends with these, I've got stars and moons underneath one of the metals. Instead of leaves, I put confetti there. Confetti in the late 90s and early 2000s was gorgeous. A lot of things were brought up to small companies, brought them up to amazing depths. And these stars are gorgeous, but I've got them in all three moons and the sky. This is solvent-based, the PBO paint. It's a different color palette, but again, I've still got back, front, like the acrylic, and then solvent-based over it, and then the beads. And I make anything I can get away with, basically. This is pine needles. And when people, and even the people's spouses, when they know how nuts I really am, they will collect things for me. I had a friend who went up to Idlewild, she and her husband brought me back an entire garbage bag full of pine needles because they were little and tiny and we hadn't seen them before, and he wanted me to have them. So you can get everybody else in on this, and they give you these gorgeous things. The woman who gave me that copper wire, it was 10-pound spools of copper wire. At that time, it was $30 a spool. She gave me $300 worth of art materials. And she said, "Can you do something with this?" And I said, "I think I can." And now I'm trying to, I'm almost coming to the end of that. And right now, I can't afford a pound spool of the darn stuff. So some things I have to say goodbye to as we go through. When I was working, I overbought. I bought wholesale. I had the EIN number and I could buy wholesale, and I went to all these art shows and anything else that came along, and I have 4 closets full of art supplies just to do this. So I'm lucky. I probably won't live long enough to use it all, but I'm lucky enough to have it. And if anybody wants to give me anything, hello.
On the piece that you pulled off of the glass
Yes,
that we passed around, you said that was 4 layers of the medium.
to start with. That's
start
my
with.
base layers.
Then what was on top? Was it acrylic on top?
That is the solvent-based, that is this. I invite you to look at these things as well. This is the solvent-based paint. You can see the pigment in the bottom of it, which is why those plastic knives come in handy, because it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to disperse the pigment within the medium. That's how heavy it is. The cool thing is then when I put it into the tray, the heavier pigment sinks, the lighter colors rise, and they do stuff. It was designed to do stuff. This is the prism. They call it a honeycomb effect, and it literally, the colors divide and change and move on the surface of this to create something that I can't do, I can't do without this help. This is the moon version of this, and they call it a hammered effect. So it's also moving and changing, and when you put those two together, sometimes they make an edge between colors, and sometimes they blend forward in between colors. I can't control that. I have a deep respect for things I can't control. The glass I can control if I can control the temperature, but it's just so exciting to me to have all these toys that I made them, but I didn't really make them. They make themselves.
Anybody else? Just a second.
This is a simple question. When you put your first layer down, approximately how thick do you think it is? And secondly, how long do you let that first layer dry? And do you let your other layers dry the same amount of time?
It has to dry until it's clear. This comes out looking a lot like Elmer's glue. It is much stronger and more flexible. I don't, maybe even in grade school I was thinking somehow ahead through time on this, because I used to take Elmer's glue and just squirt a pattern on my school desk and let it dry, and then use my ink pen to draw pictures on top of that, and then I could peel it off and take it home. It may have foretold of
I just
of
ate it.
this.
I was that kid.
See, yes, that's the toy. Teachers don't like that, but that's the toy. The mixed media allows me to take anything into my experience of creating art, and I'm so grateful for that.
You had talked about a kiln. Is it the same kind of kiln you use for pottery? And what do you put in the kiln? Is it just glass, like those small glass art blocks that you passed around?
Previously I had a brick kiln. The interior box was 14 inches by 14 inches and about 8 inches deep. It was kiln brick, surrounded by metal, and it got up to 1,700 degrees. I left that in San Diego because it is so fragile. I've had to put everything I owned on a truck for 10 days, uphill, downhill, around corners. It would have torn apart. So I left it with a very kind woman who took over the Claremont Art Guild when I had to leave. And she had taken it back to the store I bought it at and replaced all the elements and strengthened the brick and remade the kiln so it will work for 20 more years, which is very cool. The kiln I have now is fiber. It's 50 pounds. The brick kiln was over 100 pounds. It's 50 pounds. It's round, and the box is 13.5 inches round and about 6 or 7 inches. It will go to 1,600 degrees, so the fiber will not take the heat that the brick will. For clay sinters. The molecules of clay fuse together over 2,000 degrees. Glaze, however, especially low-fired glaze, I could buy bisque-fired, put a glaze on it. Glaze is glass and flux, and I could put glaze onto bisque-fired ware in my kiln. So you have to know your tools. But I love having it. I loved having the old one. And now I get to share it. There is so much education online. Any website that sells will give you tutorials. They will give you the safety data sheets. You can go on YouTube and spend hours until your eyes cross watching people make stuff. And I love that.
Anybody else? Because now, not only is Mae an artist, she's a chemist too. This is amazing stuff.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay, we're going to take about a 10-minute break.
The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250.
Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne. Learn more under the Explore tab at acpl.info.